Hello, Year 8, and welcome to the penultimate lesson on what issues are faced by growing cities. Today you're going to hear a mixture of my voice and Miss Ball's voice. So we've covered quite a lot in lessons so far. We've looked at the rural to urban migration, push and pull factors, the difference between millionaire, mega, world and capital cities, how cities in wealthy countries use technology to overcome challenges, how cities in less wealthy countries have huge disparities in wealth, what life is like for people who move to megacities in other countries, the positives and the negatives, and that similar challenges may require different management strategies. At the end of this lesson, I'm going to direct you to a quiz on Satchel 1, which will cover some of this information and you can see how much you've learned. So we've been looking at what issues are faced by growing cities. Now, when you think about it, we've only really mainly focused on the housing issues, but there are lots of issues faced by growing cities. So there's traffic issues, waste, controlling the amount of waste produced by everybody, by different people, provision of services such as drinking water, that means it needs to be clean drinking water, sanitation, healthcare and education, provide enough jobs for people, employment, and sadly as well, crime. Now, we've only really focused on housing because otherwise we could do a whole year's topic on this. However, whatever the issues are, the best solutions are always sustainable ones. Now, a sustainable solution meets and solves the problem that we have now, but doesn't create further problems further down the line. So when during this lesson, we're going to be looking at some potential solutions, and we want to be thinking how are they sustainable.
Now, this lesson we're going to have a look at a city called Curitiba. Curitiba is in southern Brazil and it's not a megacity. It is a millionaire city. Its population is around about 2 million people, and this city is famous for implementing sustainable solutions. So pause, write today's date, title, underline both with ruler, of course, and just do this little paragraph. Then we'll get started. Right, here is a picture of South America, and the yellow star shows where Rio de Janeiro is. The white star shows where Curitiba is. Now, on this map, it looks like they're really close, but remember that obviously, due to the scale of the map, that's about 1,000 kilometers. Speaking of scale, I zoomed in and I used this handy feature. I'm on something called ArcGIS here, and the brown lump which you can see in the middle there, that's Curitiba, and I measured the distance from the centre of Curitiba to the coast and found that it's 81.4 kilometres. Another thing I could do on this is, zooming in again, I could go all around the city and work out its area, and it looks like 983.4 square kilometres. But I think if I did it again, I'd be a little bit more careful with where I drew the lines. But hopefully you get the idea. Now, we're looking at sustainability and we're looking at issues in growing cities, and I'm going to talk you through the problems, and I'm going to talk you through what Curitiba has done to solve their problems, and then we need to think about whether those excuse me, whether those solutions would be practicable on a larger scale. Would they really work somewhere like Rio, for instance, somewhere that's a lot larger? So pause. Make a little table like this. You'll need, I would say, about 4 or 5 lines for each row. Right, housing issues. Housing issues in growing cities. You end up with informal housing that's poor quality. It's cramped, it's overcrowded, there's a fire risk, there's a flood risk, usually because of where these places are built. They're often built on what you would call marginal land. You know, in your exercise book, you have margin and it's at the edge and it's quite small. If you were going to do your work in the margin, it would end up being really cramped. You wouldn't be able to see it very well. It's not the best part of the page. So the best part of the page is like the normal city, where people who can afford to build good quality housing would live. And the margin, it's like the marginal land, it's not so good. So it could be a really steep hillside like Regina. It could be an area that floods often like Darravee. It could be an area that's right by the train tracks, again like Darravee. It could be somewhere that's not as good, just like the margin is not the best bit of the page. These places are built on marginal lands, so they do tend to flood sometimes. Also, these places have no services, no amenities like clean, safe drinking water. Sometimes they do have electricity, but it tends to be stolen electricity, which is not safe because it's not been put into the homes properly, and it can be overloaded quite easily, again contributing to the fire risk. And perhaps the worst thing of all is they don't have flushing toilets that are plumbed in to a sewage system that takes the waste away. Now in Curitiba, instead of just leaving it or just bulldozing it down or just forcing everybody to leave and ignoring the problem, instead what the council did was they took the marginal flooded land and made it into parks. We'll have a look at parks later. And then some areas of quite good land but further out of the city, they made some site and service projects. A site and service project is like a little town that's built in small increments, in small steps. So each one of these little houses could be for a family to move to from inside the informal settlement, but those people would be involved in the construction of it. That would give a training opportunity for someone who was otherwise unemployable. After they've done this, they've got a skill that they can take away and be paid for. Now, it's better quality housing, but the biggest issue is that they've got clean water piped into the home, they've got the sewage piped out of the home, and the electricity is safely done. Now, these places do cost, but they're very affordable, and it's something that you can then really call your home. And as you see from the picture on one side where they've just started to be built, then on the other side, a few months, perhaps a year later, when some plants have started to grow and people can paint them different colours, and places grow from here onwards. This isn't the end of these settlements, this is just the beginning. It still preserves a sense of community. Traffic issues. This picture is in Rio, the one in daytime, and the one at night time in Sao Paulo. So they are two megacities in Brazil that have awful traffic problems. Now, traffic jams or traffic congestion, it's not just frustrating if you're trying to get somewhere. It also causes a lot of air pollution and noise pollution, both of which are very bad for people's health. Also, they cause accidents, and it's a great loss of time that would be better spent doing something, whether that's work or study or just relaxing, which is also a good use of people's time after they've had a hard day's work. And huge delays of getting from where you want to be to where you want to go. In Curitiba, the whole of the city is joined up by what they call the Bus Rapid Transit Scheme. Now, these red buses, they are tri-articulated. There's 3 sections in the bus. This allows them to be really large, so they can take a large number of passengers at any one time, and the articulations allow the bus to bend around corners. Now, the bus lanes in Curitiba are in the centre of the highway or the road, not on the edges like we have bus lanes here in Britain. And the tubes next to them are fully accessible. Now, when you go into one of these tubes, you can see here that there's some steps, but at the other side, where you just can't quite see in the photograph, there's a wheelchair lift, which you could also use for a pushchair or someone who was had other limited mobility. So they're fully accessible. You can buy one ticket for wherever you go, and that allows you to use the Bus Rapid Transit Scheme for the rest of the day. So it's very affordable, it's very quick and easy because you've already bought your ticket by the time you get into these tubes. You go straight on, there's none of having to pay the driver, it's all sorted out already. And they're very frequent, they come at least every 10 minutes, but in some areas more frequently than that. And they're all linked up, so it's not just a couple of popular routes, there are routes everywhere. It's much less pollution and it keeps a lot of cars off the road. Almost everyone in Curitiba, not just poor people, but almost everybody uses the Bus Rapid Transit Scheme. Waste in cities is such a huge problem. It is dirty, toxic, poisonous. Here's a picture of waste in the Amazon River in a Brazilian city called Manaus. And this other great big pile of waste is being picked over by some people trying to find something that they could sell out of it. It's filthy and nasty, but it's also extremely unhealthy. In Curitiba, a lot of the waste has been dealt with just by a really excellent recycling scheme. You can see here that the recycling scheme separates things into 5 types of recycled material. But how do you get people to actually use these bins? How do you get people to really invest their time in recycling? Well, Curitiba do it by exchanging recycled waste, for food or toys or bus tickets. So you can take some recycled, let's say some recycled drinks cans, you could take those down to the Bus Rapid Transit station and you can exchange them for a ticket for the day. That's really useful for extremely poor people. Or you can exchange 4 kilograms of recycled materials for 1 kilogram of fresh food. That's why this picture here of the vegetables. And you can even exchange it for toys for your children. Imagine how wonderful that must be for very poor people who previously wouldn't have been able to afford to get their small children any toys at Christmas. Well, no green space is a big issue. Not only does it look awful, but I imagine it must feel awful to live in a place where there is no green space, no gardens, no parks. It's overcrowded and unhealthy. It's unhealthy physically and it's unhealthy mentally as well. But then there's the increased fire risk. And remember that these places are often on marginal land, while there's an increased flood risk too. In Curitiba, the informal settlements had been built on the land that was susceptible to flooding. Now, the council made the site and service settlements somewhere safer, and they could move people from those flooding areas and make parks in those areas instead. Now that kills two birds with one stone. In fact, maybe three birds even. Firstly, it gives the people somewhere better and safer to live. Secondly, it provides green space for everyone. And thirdly, it copes with the flooding problem, because this area, if it floods, then it's going to drain away slowly and it's not really going to be a problem because it's only a few fields. It's a nice park to walk in most of the time. You can go there and play games, you can go and relax, you can just go for a walk. It's really good for your physical and mental well-being. The picture with the sheep, those sheep are actually employees, I suppose, of Curitiba Council, because they don't mow the grass. They have sheep which are looked after by a shepherd who takes them from park to park for over the year, and the sheep keep the grass down. And the parks are all linked up by green corridors. The other picture shows you a green corridor. So it's like a narrow green space that links up the larger parks. So it is possible to go all the way around the city just in the parkland and green corridors.
So here are some answers for you. You might find that you've only really found sustainable solutions, or maybe unsustainable. But what I want you to do is just pause here for a moment and just make sure that you've got some ideas for each box. So the unsustainable solutions are often things that people will just jump to. These are the sort of ideas that people will jump to straight away, thinking, well, this is an obvious thing to do, let's do this, but often aren't sustainable. So pause the video here and make sure you've got some key ideas for each box. I also want you to be just thinking about, would these sustainable solutions work in Derby? Because next lesson you'll be doing a little bit of a write-up thinking about what would be the best thing to do in Derby. So to finish us off, I want you to go to Satchel 1, where your teacher should have posted a quiz for you to do. There are 20 questions. You can have up to 3 attempts to try and get full marks. Before you do it, you might want to have a brief look through your notes just to check over and recap and just remind you of the key information before you do it. So once you've done the quiz, that's it for today. Try and make sure you get full marks, or at least as close to full marks as possible. Have more than a couple of attempts if you don't do well in the first go. So well done, and thank you for watching.